Hey, Pretty Girl Club. I wanted to make this video because I've noticed that a lot of unambiguous mono dark skinned black women, they love pulling in darker skinned mixed women into their group and saying that they have the exact same experiences. I also want people to stop pretending that dark skinned women can't benefit from featurism or texturism. If dark skinned mono black women had the same exact experiences as a dark skinned mixed race woman, then there would be no such thing as texturism or featurism. Has anyone noticed that colorism is used to shield jealousy against light-skinned black women, whereas texturism and featurism are used to shield jealousy against darker-skinned mixed-race women? Another thing that I've noticed is that people like to pretend like dark-skinned mixed women don't have similarities with the rest of the exoticals. So, for example, people will say, oh, because you're dark skinned, you're going to have the same exact experience as an unambiguous mono black woman. That's not true, because if somebody is mixed race, especially if they were growing up in a multiracial environment, sometimes people speak different languages in their home. They have the same experience as maybe their parent does not even look anything like them because their parent's a totally different race than them because they are mixed race. And I've noticed that one of the division tactics that people try to use against exotical YouTube channels is they try to divide us up based on race and skin tone. So, for example, a lot of us have a lot more similarities than differences. But what they'll try to do is they'll say to darker skinned mixed women, they'll say, light skinned mixed women won't accept you. And then they'll say to light skinned mixed women, white people won't accept you. And then they'll say to light skinned black women, mixed women won't accept you. And so they're doing all this nitpicking and trying to say, oh, so and so other person won't accept you. They're doing that because they want you to feel isolated, because that's how they feel. I've noticed that a lot of unambiguous darker skinned mono black women are upset because this channel caters to damn near every other type of black/black adjacent woman except for them, and that is because they have their own exclusive spaces. If you're looking for an exclusive space for mono dark skinned unambiguous black women, please go to a channel like Chrissy's. But I've noticed that because those women feel excluded, they are trying to make other women within this community feel excluded. So they'll say to the light-skinned black women, like, oh, you're still an N-word. They'll give the you're still an N-word talking point, and they'll be like, well, you're not biracial, as if not being biracial invalidates the differences in your experience. The difference between this YouTube space versus other YouTube spaces is that over here in the exotical community, by the way, exotical is not a race, but over here in this side of YouTube, we identify with both blackness as well as privilege. And I've noticed that a lot of people in other spaces, they tend to tie their own blackness to disadvantages. And they will say things like, no one likes me because of my skin tone, or no one likes me because of my blackness. And I'm not going to invalidate their experiences. They have a right to talk about their experiences or not feeling represented. They have the right to share their stories, but so do we. So I've noticed that there's this obsession that I see in the mono unambiguous dark skin community where they don't benefit from maybe colorism, texturism, or featurism. And by the way, that's colorism, texturism, and featurism should not exist. Okay. So I'm not over here saying, oh my God, it's so good that we have, colorism, texturism, featurism, pretty privilege, capitalism, all these things are so great. It's not like I'm trying to say that, but what I'm trying to do is gather all of the women who do not fit into the mainstream, quote unquote, black empowerment types of YouTube channels, because a lot of the problems that they've talked about, I personally have not been able to relate to a lot of them. And I think that is because of my ambiguity. And so what a lot of mono unambiguous dark-skinned women don't understand is that, yes, something as simple as having light eyes can give you ambiguity in your experiences. But they don't understand that because they don't have that. They're unambiguous. So no matter what they do, no matter what hairstyle they have, no matter how they look, like they're always going to be viewed in the same exact way, just with a different hairstyle. But over here, we have blackness as a core part of our identity, as well as ambiguity. And yes, we are acknowledging our privilege. It's so funny how the black community, they swear up and down that we need to acknowledge our privilege. And then when we do acknowledge our privilege, and then when we have the audacity to include dark-skinned women who have privileges such as featurism, texturism, or mixed race privilege, then suddenly the only ones that are left out are the unambiguous mono dark-skinned black women. Meanwhile, they're the ones who started their own spaces, which I agree with, and they should start their own spaces. I think it's funny how on one hand people will tell you to acknowledge your privilege, and then on the other hand, when you do say, hey, yeah, you're right, I benefit from featurism and texturism, then suddenly it's, oh, but you don't benefit from colorism. Or let's say you're a light-skinned black woman. Oh, but you don't benefit from mixed privilege. Let's say you are a mixed race light-skinned woman. Oh, but you're still not white. The white side won't accept you. And they're doing this because they want to try to get us to establish a hierarchy amongst ourselves, because they're hoping that that can divide us all up. And that's exactly why this channel is called Exoticals United, because I know that the way that you can brainwash people, like in terms of sociology, the way that you can exert power over others is by first dividing them up. And so what they want us to do is they want us to waste our time arguing over terminologies. They want us to argue about all of our small nuances and differences, as opposed to coming together and simply telling our stories and kind of like gathering amongst ourselves based on our similarities rather than arguing about our differences. And I've noticed that now that there are about 30 channels, there are over 30 channels at this point. So now that we've got dozens of people creating their own YouTube channels, now we are really a threat, because you can't just say that I'm biased anymore, because at this point, we have women who are from West Africa who are making content. We've got women from Puerto Rico who are making content. There are light-skinned monoracial black women making content. We've got dark-skinned exoticals making content, dark-skinned multiracial or biracial women. So it destroys that talking point of nobody's there for you, nobody's on your side. And I've noticed that these women wanted their exclusive spaces so bad, and then when we finally say, you're right, you do deserve an exclusive space, so let's all get out of it. And then we all come over here, and then they see how many of us are coming over here, and they see what our lives are actually like. Then suddenly it's, oh no, Rihanna and Beyonce, they're unambiguous. You guys need to all come back to the black community. And it's like, this channel in and of itself was never about simply leaving the black community. This channel wasn't even about that. It was called Exoticals United. That's literally a troll term that I took from another YouTuber's comment section. So it was never about leaving the black community. It was about letting unambiguous mono dark-skinned black women who do not benefit from colorism, texturism, or featurism, letting them have their spaces and be in peace, and then creating a place on YouTube where we talk about ourselves. And on this YouTube channel, you've never seen me pull up pictures of somebody unambiguous and say, oh my God, they're so ugly. Oh, look at their features, look at their hair, because I'm not dumb enough to do something like that. And so I think that what people are noticing is that the way that we do our YouTube channels over here, because we're positive and because we're just, the pretty girl club, and we kind of talk about carefree stuff, and we actually offer solutions and kind of tell funny stories. So because we're just kind of minding our business, suddenly people are getting mad because they feel like, wait a minute, how dare you create your own space and then your space is better than mine? I mean, I think that's really what it is. I think that some people are literally just mad because the actual content that you see from a lot of the creators on this side of YouTube is literally and objectively more helpful than a lot of the content you've seen in black empowerment spaces. I think that's really what it is. And I think that people are mad because we are actually feeling empowered over here. We're not having a skin tone war, or like who's half white and who's not half white and who's this, who's that. Oh, the Blasians go over there and then the Latinas go over here. We're not wasting our time with that, because we already know that that is a typical divide and conquer tactic. Anybody who disagrees does not understand sociology. One of the main components, if you want to eliminate an enemy, is to divide them up into as many categories as possible so that they waste their time arguing over terminologies and identity policing. Meanwhile, you get to go and actually make moves, make money moves, and make business moves in your community. This divide and conquer tactic has been used for thousands of years all over the world. If you do not believe me, please go and pick up a history book. But I've noticed that some people, they get mad because this space is exclusive to the women who do not identify as unambiguous mono dark-skinned black women who have experienced, colorism, texturism, featurism. If you're a victim of all three, or if you have experienced all three of those things, then yeah, this channel is not going to be relatable to you, but that's okay. And it's funny how people will tell you, acknowledge your privilege, and then when you do, then they'll say, you think you're better. Or they'll say, get out of our spaces, stop replacing us. And then when you say, you know what, you're right, you guys deserve a space, let's make our own YouTube channels, then suddenly you're excluding us. And one of the comments I received on here not that long ago was this girl was like, you act like pretty unambiguous women don't exist. And it's like, this channel doesn't even center unambiguous mono dark skinned black women. And also, why am I required to acknowledge or center my YouTube channel around a phenotype that I don't have? But then in the meantime, I don't go over to Chrissy's channel or other people's channels and tell them, hey, you need to talk about pretty light skinned women. I don't tell them that because it's their space. They are the creators of their own YouTube channel, so they get to do whatever they want. And I've noticed that some people are literally mad because a lot of us over here are good at manifesting what we want. I know I sound super like kooky right now when I use the term manifesting, but that's really what it is. I think that people are genuinely threatened by the fact that a lot of us are very confident. A lot of the women are starting their own YouTube channels. And also, I like the fact that some girls are starting their channels and they have their own niche. Like they kind of have their own topics that they talk about. Some women talk about Christianity on their channels. Some of them talk about spirituality. Some of them define their own terms or they have their own nicknames for their subscribers. And that is how you build a community. And by the way, this community is simply online. I'm not Rosa Parks. I am not Martin Luther King. I am not an actual government activist or anything like that. My goal was to just get a conversation started and exchange ideas and to see if I was crazy or not. And it turns out, apparently I wasn't crazy. I was not alone this whole time. And I think that that's the most healing thing about this space. It's all of us coming together and realizing, oh my gosh, we're not alone. And I think that some dark-skinned, unambiguous, mono black women, for some of them, the reason why they get mad is because they're mad that this space includes women who are dark-skinned, but they're just ambiguous looking. So they're benefiting from texturism or featurism, or they're like mixed race types of women. And I think people are mad about that because they have such an inferiority complex about their skin tone, and they're used to feeling excluded because of their skin tone. They can't fathom that there is a community on YouTube who includes women who happen to have a darker skin tone and doesn't like try to separate all of us out. Like, oh, okay, well, you're light. Okay, well, you're not light enough. Okay, get off my channel because, you're too black looking or you're too this. Like, no. And for the people who don't believe in DNA tests, that's exactly why I use the term exotical and I don't use a racial term as the title of my YouTube channel, because I understand that even when it comes to the DNA test, it really tells you the land mass that your ancestors occupied. And so that's why I say on this channel is for women who identify with blackness and ambiguity and privilege. And when I use the term privilege, I'm talking about benefiting from either colorism, texturism, or featurism, or if you want to call it mixed race privilege or whatever. And then when people say, oh, well, what is looking mixed? Let's not try to pretend like we suddenly don't know what an unambiguous black person looks like. Anytime I have tried to put up examples of what an unambiguous woman is, I've got unambiguous women who try to come in my comment section and argue and say, well, she doesn't look like that. That's not what we look like. And when I use the term unambiguous mono dark-skinned black women, I'm talking about women like JT from the City Girls, Suki Hana, Viola Davis, Tika Sumpter. I'm talking about women like Ari Lennox, Tiana Taylor. So yeah, some of these women may have 5 to 10% European or whatever. But again, on this channel, for those who do believe in the DNA test, I believe that 25% or more DNA from another ancestry makes you undeniably mixed race. Anything below that, people are going to argue back and forth. But I do make a space for the women who benefit still from texturism and featurism. So a good example of this are people who come from the Horn of Africa. I think I'm using the right terminology, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. Don't try to pretend all of a sudden like you don't know what featurism is or you don't know what texturism is. All of the terminologies that I got for this channel, I directly took them from unambiguous Black empowerment content creators. And so if you want to argue with me, argue with the Black women who made these terms. Because the unambiguous women who wanted their exclusive spaces, having an exclusive space means that certain people are excluded. And that is totally fine. It doesn't mean that like I can't watch those channels. Like, yeah, I can watch them, but I also can't get mad if they don't center their content around my opinions or my talking points. And so this channel is never going to center unambiguous mono dark-skinned Black women who have been victims of either colorism, texturism, or featurism. This channel separates all of those things out. and I make videos for the nuances of all of those things. The way that I view this YouTube channel is like a library. So every video is its own book, every video is its own work of art, it's its own piece of work. And so if I want to talk about a certain topic, I'll make a whole video on it. I don't have to just say one or two sentences and then move on. No, I make entire videos describing exactly what I'm talking about. I do have a whole entire Featurism series coming up. I know that some people are going to argue and say, well, those aren't West African features. Okay, well, you know exactly what I'm talking about, though. Because when you guys say, oh, people are being futurist, generally speaking, people are talking about those who are being futurist against kind of the more typical West African features like Sukihana or like JT from the City Girls. That's what people mean when they say you're being futurist against them. They're talking about those features as like not being praised or whatever. And so when I say that you are benefiting from Featurism, I'm talking about people who have maybe more narrow features, or maybe you have light eyes. You know how much people are obsessed with like green eyes and blue eyes. And for the people who like to say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. You know, having light eyes or whatever, that's not a big deal. Okay, well, tell that to the people in the Black community who have not benefited from Featurism, because they've had people make fun of their features because they do not have a certain nose type or a certain, certain lips or whatever, or because they don't look like women in Hollywood who have had nose jobs and all that. But anyway, what do you ladies think? Have you ever had someone try to gaslight your ancestry because you're not white enough? Because I can tell you, for the people who try to gaslight darker skinned mixed women and say, well, you're not mixed or it doesn't matter, like Chili from TLC, they tried to say, oh, it doesn't matter because she's too dark, or they called her burnt. It's like, okay, but that doesn't erase her own family members. Like, that doesn't erase her family members. And also, it doesn't erase the fact that Chili is still going to benefit from texturism. And also, one of the ways that you know that you benefit from an ism is if people are fighting tooth and nail to have you represent them. Notice how unambiguous women, they're not fighting to be represented by JT or Sukihana or Normani. Normani's new song that came out, that didn't even chart. Her song didn't chart, just like how Kelly Rowland's music got ignored. Normani's music also got ignored. So a lot of unambiguous mono dark-skinned Black women themselves don't want their own women who actually look like them to even represent them, because they will fight over the phenotypes that benefit from the isms. So whether that's featurism, such as the women who have kind of those Horn African features, I know that they're not the only types of women who can benefit from featurism, but that's just the best example that I can give. And the quickest example, because most people here in the United States know what that means. If you live in another country, it may be something different for you. I'm not sure. But anytime somebody is fighting to bring you back into the Black community, well, that means that you have privilege within the Black community, and people are trying to tether onto your phenotype. This is why people swear up and down, oh, Beyonce and Rihanna, Beyonce looks like every woman in Houston. She does not look like every woman in Houston. Oh, Rihanna, everybody looks like Rihanna. No, they don't. The average unambiguous mono dark-skinned Black woman does not have beige skin and green eyes. But if people are fighting over your phenotype and fighting for you to represent them, this means that they view you as someone who is kind of higher than them, or they view you as someone who is deemed as beautiful in society or deemed as valuable in society. We all know that a lot of unambiguous mono Black people, men and women, are kind of center some of their beauty standards around whiteness. And one thing that I also don't like, though, is whenever people are talking about featurism and they bring up like Ethiopian women, for example, they will say things like, oh, they have white features or they have European features. And they're actually conflating European features with non-West African features, because I've noticed in the Black community, they actually have a lot of black and white thinking. No pun intended, but they have a lot of black and white thinking, which is actually a sign of mental illness. And so because a lot of them don't understand nuance, they don't understand that benefiting from featurism, it simply means that you do not have facial features that are associated with unambiguous monoracial African American women. We know that when it comes to the slave trade, that a lot of the slaves were taken from West Africa. I'm not saying that they weren't taken from other places, but usually when people are making fun of others and calling them the names of animals, they are talking about those West African types of features. By the way, this channel does not tolerate featurism against any type of face structure, because there are light-skinned women who have the same facial features as JT or the same facial features as Sukihana, and they also get called ugly, by the way. That's another thing. A lot of people uphold featurism and texturism against light-skinned women the most. For example, they will make fun of women like Little Mama. They'll make fun of women like Ice Spice or Lotto. Anybody who has either a type 4 hair texture or they have kind of those West African slash Bantu features, people will suddenly try to say, oh, well, you're just a mediocre light woman. You're a basic looking light woman. Kind of like how Chrissy said on that one video that she has now hidden. And then they'll talk about light skinned women's hair textures and be like, oh, she has 4 inches of fried leave out. So why is it that when we create our own space and we actually admit, hey, we are benefiting from one of the isms, at least one of the isms. Some people on here might be benefiting from all of the isms. Maybe you're benefiting from colorism, texturism, and featurism. For some women, maybe they're benefiting from featurism only, or they're benefiting from colorism only, and then everything else about them is like unambiguously black. You know what I mean when I say unambiguous. I'm talking about the 4C hair. Maybe you're a light-skinned mono black woman and you have, you're benefiting from colorism, but maybe people have tried to use featurism and texturism against you. And I know that a lot of people in the unambiguous mono dark skinned black community are going to say that that's not a big deal because those women are have been suffering from all of the isms. And by the way, I'm sorry to hear that. I do not support people being featurist, colorist, or texturist against anyone. But this channel is for those who are somewhere in the middle. I know that this channel does not represent the majority of women in the black community, but that's why we need this space. It's because we know that out in the real world, or I don't know, maybe if you're in the black community or you live in a black community, there is something about your phenotype that stands out, or there's something about your racial background that stands out. So yes, that includes dark-skinned women who either benefit from featurism or texturism, or they are mixed race. Stop pretending that that doesn't exist. That absolutely does exist. And you know how I know it exists? Because anytime an unambiguous mono dark-skinned black woman who's African American tries to brag about how pretty their group is, they will often use a dark-skinned woman who has no features in common with their own. They'll use pictures of Chili from TLC. They'll use pictures of Tatiana Ali. They'll use pictures of Justine Skye or Jasmine Tooks or women who have significantly different features than their own or a significantly different hair texture than their own. They'll use pictures of like Ethiopian women or kind of like Somali looking women. And then they'll try to say, what are you talking about? Us dark skins are so beautiful because look at these women. And they know damn well that that is not how a lot of the unambiguous mono darker skinned black women look in the United States. And so why is it that when other women say it, it's okay? If an unambiguous content creator says it, it's okay, but suddenly because I'm light skinned, I'm not allowed to say the same thing. No, this space isn't going anywhere. This channel's not going anywhere. My core audience isn't going anywhere. But what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.